kind opportunity. I think this is the second topic that I'm going through this series of your the program, the FTP program. And today we will be more focusing on the prediction for genotoxicity. So that's what we are looking at. But before I start, it is always better to understand what is that of the audiences or the participants are of. So are you all from a mix of different areas, or it's basically chemistry or pharmaceutics or analysis? So could you please let me know from which different subject experts are here? You can put it on the chat.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Different branches of pharmacy people, sir.
Okay. Okay. So please keep the session interactive. You can either put it on the chat, or you can even unmute yourself and speak. So that will be very easy, so that less efforts by the organizer also in between to unmute themselves. Anyway, let us start. So always a grand challenge for all of us is how to best incorporate the existing knowledge. And this was said by the head of GSK in 2009. So how to incorporate existing knowledge is always a challenge, because we always play around what is already being done, what is yet to be done, and what more could be done. Or we try to take a replicate, try to make derivatives and see if it works or not. But we also have to think of thinking out of the box. Until unless we think out of the box, Nobel laureates, impossibility made possibility, all this would have happened. So it is very important that how the basic science can be used for you to innovate or come out with something new. And that's where the big pharma coming into the 21st century. I hope everybody knows about NCEs or NMEs, that is the new chemical entities. Every year, FDA approves the research molecules, very minimal numbers, maybe 24, 30, or 39, or 14, or 40, like that it goes. But the cost that is involved in all these research molecules is ranging from 1 to 1.5 billion US dollars. But we have to also think about, as a civilian, are we concerned about research and other things? Probably not. We, the community, scientific community, is more concerned about it. The normal civilian or the population is more concerned about two main factors. One, whether if I take this pill or a medicine, whether this gets cured or the disease gets cured and without any much adverse effects. Second, can I afford it? If I am not able to afford, then I think, okay, let the disease go on. I'll die. There are situations where we know about that. So these are the main key things where the social society is being more concerned about. Scientific community is more concerned about efficacy, strategies, and producibility, all those things. But we have to consider all high profile failures in recent drug discovery. And this figure is unlikely to drop substantially. And we wanted to reduce that. That is ultimately the goal. Because your the failures, if it is going high, your budget also going to increase. That's why we have to understand the importance of medicinal chemistry. And when you're doing drug discovery, it is also important all the different experts sit together, join together to come out with a drug. Not like only a chemist can do that job. Not only a pharmaceutics can think about the other part or even drug together. So medicinal chemistry is something that we are looking at, where the science that deals with discovery or design of new therapeutic chemicals and the development of these chemicals into useful medicine. That's where we use it as medicinal chemistry. So the person who is doing organic chemistry could easily turn to be a medicinal chemistry once he or she realizes the compound that they are synthesizing is having a medicinal value. If not, no, you could be a material scientist also. Physical chemical properties also could be there for any chemical compound. So such compounds could be also called as a drug candidate, which involves synthesis, structure activity relationships, receptor interactions, ADME, and toxicity. So it's a medicinal chemist should always have a understanding about biological problems, the chemistry, the pharmaceutical regulatory other criterias, the medical treatment criterias, and which involves altogether understanding of these mechanisms is very important. Now let us see what is the cause of the failure for the oral drugs. Based on the papers from 1988 and 1997, the earlier reason during the early stages, the reasons were that pharmacokinetics, ADME, and the efficacy was the main reason why there was a lot of oral drug failures happening during that time. So ADME was a big issue at that time, basically, right? But toxicity was not a great concern during that time because of the failure. The main reason why these other things were not so much concerned because we were always working with our existing knowledge. So there will be a person who will be very expert in specific kinds of chemotypes. He or she is very sure that this is going to work. So that particular expertise and relevance of science worked a lot. But when we started using a lot of sophisticated tools and technologies and other approaches, we could see the trend has completely changed. Later, from maybe after 2000, the main reason for the failure of oral drugs is basically because of toxicity and strategy. The strategy is again a big challenge here because when you're very much confident on a specific chemotype, your strategy will be better there because you know what you're doing. But when all these sophisticated technologies and methodologies came in, then there is no too much of value there in strategy because you come up with a lot of hypothesis and you're trying to validate it. There might be chances you're missing something else. So strategy is a very big reason for about 50% of the reason for being the failure of oral drugs. And a majority of the contribution goes to the toxicity studies. So toxicity is also, especially hERG liability is there, which is now considered to be analyzed at early stages of drug discovery. So these things has to be taken care. And that why I want to specifically mention is you have to analyze the drugs which came during this era where ADME properties was having issues and later stages you have toxicity issues. Now, when you work on a drug discovery project, don't think that you're just doing a in vitro assay to get IC50 values and for publication purpose. Correct me if I'm wrong. I don't think there's a single research molecule or a patented marketed drug molecule from Indian academia that is being marketed by companies. There might be nutraceuticals and natural products or herbal products. No, I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about NMEs and NCEs. If there is something there, please let me know. I am not aware. But if you see in US and European market, most of their basic compound that is patented, the technology transfer licensing has happened from an academia to a pharma industry. So that's where we now, whenever we discuss, we say we are not up to that level. We are not doing something advanced. Then when we will do, we are telling them since 10 years or 20 years. But when we will start doing this, I don't say everybody, but most of us, including me. So we have to start thinking this and we have to raise accordingly and come with some new issues. So that's where I want to get to giving a good overview about the failures where we have to concentrate on, specifically on genotoxicity. So these are chemical compounds having toxic or destructive effect on a genetic material like RNA or DNA. It can cause DNA damage, also affects integrity of the cell. So when there is an exposure to genotoxicant, the DNA gets damaged. It could be a direct reporters, which is like genetic reversion, indirect reporters like SOS-induced transcription, and direct visualization, where you will be able to see about fragment
Sir. Sir, Girna sir, are you there? Hello. Sir, Girna sir. Sir, Girna sir.
Can you hear me? Hello?
Sir,
Yes.
sir, sir, now we can hear you, sir. Right, sir, right, sir. We got this.
Okay.
Right.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sorry, my internet was unstable.
Right.
Did you listen to this slide or should I repeat it?
Okay, sir. From this slide, we can continue, sir. That means within
Okay.
the minutes only we lost you.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Right.
So, yeah. So, genotoxicity, I was telling about the toxicant, which is a compound, a chemical compound, which having toxic or destructive effect. And it will be affecting your genetic material, basically DNA or RNA, and the damage affects the integrity of the cell. It could be direct, indirect, and directly you can visualize them, understanding about the intact or fragmented DNAs. Now, what are these genotoxins also? They are carcinogens or cancer causing agents. They are initiators or could be promoters. And they could be mutagens or mutation causing agents. They could be teratogens, which is birth defect causing agents. I do not want to put the pictures here, so I avoided putting the pictures. They don't look good. So that's why I tried to stay away those pictures. All mutagens are genotoxic, but all genotoxins are not mutagenic. So that's what we have to keep in mind. So the main three categories are carcinogens, mutagens, and teratogens. Of course, subclassifications are there, but mutagens are genotoxic, but all genotoxins are not mutagenic. These affects the germ cells, which produce the gametes that is called from the teratogens actually. So they are called as terogens, and which affects the somatic cell, which forms the building blocks of the body, is called carcinogens. They also, the agents that affect the DNA damage, the electrophilic species form covalent adducts to DNA, also causes reactive oxygen, UV and ionizing radiations, nucleoside topoisomerase, and then protein synthesis inhibitors. And there, especially the herbal extracts in plants like calamus, aconite, esphanol, alfalfa, tucloside, they are all having all these DNA damage properties. These also cause lesions, breakage, fusion, and deletion and missegregation, including non-disjunction, apoptosis, neurosuppression, and inflammation. And these mutations also lead to wide variety of diseases to cancer. So there will be systemic toxicant and also organ toxicant. So selectivity is also there in some cases. Now let us see the natural and the man-made chemicals. I still remember my grandmother used to tell me, don't have the seeds of the apple. I don't know whether she knew genotoxicity, but she used to say that. So here it is said that the toxic effect being seen when you're taking 1 gram per kg of the body weight. That's how you try to look at it. So there is a molecule called as muscimol, which is found in fly agaric mushrooms actually. And there is another one, solanine, which is found in green potatoes. I don't think we consume a lot of green potatoes, but yeah. And then arginine, just in apple seeds. Similarly, when you come to drugs also, ethylene glycol, sodium thiopental, and aspirin. But when you're coming to the man-made, at the bottom, they have no toxic effect even at 1 gram per kg of the body weight. The man-made is basically MSG, then Teflon, which we use on non-stick pans, and also aspartame. And when you go for the natural side, we are looking at citric acid, sucrose, and even essential for life, which is water. So these all we have to have an understanding. There is a certain limit that we could consume or take. That's where the toxic levels also being given as per the dosage. Alcohol, 0.05 percentage, non-toxic and beneficial dose also. Toxic dose, if it is 0.1 percentage, which is the ethanol blood levels. And if it is going to 0.5 percentage, it is a lethal dose. So that's where carbon monoxide, then sleeping aids, aspirin, ibuprofen, even ibuprofen also, if you're taking 7 tablets at a single time, that will be causing acute oral dose. There will be issues. And even 2 tablets max is okay. So that's why these are all prescription has to go and has to go in the right frequency and the dosage form. The well-known teratogens, and there are plenty of history and study being carried out on all these teratogens. Thalidomide, which also causes phocomelia and also multiple defects. Androgens, virilization, esophageal and cardiac defects. Then prostagestins, virilization of female fetus. Warfarin, nose, eye, hand defects and growth retardation. Phenytoin, microcephaly, and hypoplastic phalanges, then and many more others. But what we have to understand, because I want to focus a bit more on teratogens, recently, if you see past 5 years, maybe 5 to 10 years, the cases of teratogens are much more increasing in India. And is it because of food or it is because of other genetically modified some things? I don't want to specify it. We don't know what is happening actually. We have to go through that. During our ages, during our childhood, when our mother were pregnant, we most of the time we really didn't know because it was not reported or not being diagnosed. That could be a case. So in the other cases, it was not much there as we see right now. So these has to be studied in detail on a research scientific perspective. What is the causage? What is the reason behind it? Now the question is how to estimate all these things. Of course, when you go for wet lab, you have Amos mutagenicity test or Amos test, COMETS assays, chromosome aberration test, and micronuclease assay. Most of the time you need the facility and also you need to have your own economy, financial support to carry out these tests. But later, too much of data has been generated. So we were able to go with the molecular structure analysis, which could be a structure knowledge based or a database based. They are called structure activity relationship, and it could be quantitative structure activity relationship. They're based on category formation and also based on expert systems. And they are called as non-testing approaches or alternative approaches. In India, UGC has funded 5 alternate animal testing centers in different universities and research centers. Their main aim is to reduce the animal testing wherever possible, not to completely avoid, to reduce. So they also came up with these SAR models and all these methodologies, which is already approved following OECD principles, regulatory bodies principles, and then they're trying to reduce it. So we basically look at molecular structure analysis, and they are a short-term test, bioassays, and epidemiologies. Now let's see what is this structure. Now into the these problems, including toxicity and many more other alerts, structural alerts. They're called structural alerts. So experimentally, you need to know the mechanisms, the activities, which we take it from biological data, of course, assay or animal testing or in vitro. And then theoretically, we try to understand the structures and its reaction. So, and then empirically, we try to take the method of analysis, which is again a statistical data. The combination of the mechanism, the structures and its corresponding reaction, including the method of analysis, is said to be structure activity relationship. That is called SAR. So structure comes from chemistry, activity comes from biology, relationship. The correlation is being found out using statistics or machine learning. But how to obtain this structure activity model? As I already told you, we have biology and chemistry based functional classification, and we have to identify molecular properties or the structural properties. Now, that is where the importance of the word mechanistic driven. I hope when Shobha Madam was reading, there was a word called mechanistic driven drug discovery. I don't know how many of you noted that. Drug discoveries always should be mechanistic driven. Only thing I just emphasized it. Because sometimes when people do docking, molecular docking, they really don't care about the bioavailability. They don't care about druggability of the protein. And if I ask a question, how far you are confident the protein that you have chosen for docking and the target that you're doing for in vitro or in vivo, how can you correlate those targets? Most of the time, they don't have an answer. How did they validate that these targets are related? Right? So that is where we wanted to understand mechanism. We need to know the catalytic site. We need to know which region, whether your compound is going to inhibit or promote, we have to know. So that's why it is written mechanistically relevant chemical descriptors. Then quantitation, mechanistic characterization, which again goes to biological activities. So combination of structural descriptors, that is chemical descriptors, which has a mechanistic relevance to the biological activity. And these both are being correlated using statistical methods or machine learning data, and we will be able to generate an SAR model. So simply clicking a button and you're getting chemical descriptors from a structure doesn't make sense that those molecular properties are relevant to that particular biological activity. And keep in mind, here we are not simply looking at R square. If you think that R square is giving you 0.92 or 92%, then if the molecular properties does not have any relevance to the activity, there's no point of you getting 0.9 to 0.93 of R squares. So that's where we have to understand in deep, what do you mean by this quantitative structural activity relationship? So when you come to this genotoxicity or any kind of developmental toxicity studies, of course, there are standard models already available. Now, the question is whether those models are having the reproducible capacity for your compounds, because your chemotype compounds might be entirely different from the training set they have used to generate those models. So keep in mind, you need to have a molecular structure, and you will be using tools to extract the molecular descriptors out from that structure. And you will be also able to get the experimental data that is called as a response variable as and you have to normalize the data. So data transformation is required. So combining using the molecular descriptor or molecular property data and the activity data, you try to correlate them. And this correlation is being done using statistics or machine learning methods. So by using this statistics or machine learning method, we try to correlate them. And then finally, we validate it. Because that's a question here, how far we can validate that the prediction for genotoxicity or any other SAR related properties is reliable. So the validation tells you that how far is the standard deviation of this model prediction. How far is the applicability domain of the model when compared to the compounds? I'll come to that point. But if you have any questions, please go ahead and ask. I don't want you to wait till the end so that I can clarify and go, and it will be easy for you also to understand. So if you think that, sir, I'm not able to understand anything, please feel free to tell me so that I can maybe put some different examples and try to explain it, right? So it's very important that you understand each step and go. So when the QSR methodology came, that's where many of the experts tell that when you pick up around 1,000 QSR papers, among them only 10 papers are the QSR models are really usable and reproducible. The other major portion of the papers, the published QSR papers, are unusable because they just predicted some descriptors, correlated, and published. Now, how can we use that model? In order to use that model, we need some data. If it is a regression model, of course, an equation comes in. But if it is a machine learning model, you don't have any equation, right? So you have to write the model, and that model will be used to predict the activity or toxicity for your molecules also. So in order to avoid a lot of bias, there were regulatories were formed for these QSR techniques actually, because QSR is one of the dangerous method which will mislead you to give you wrong predictions. So you have to do it with the utmost care and also with signs of relevance. So here you can see reach endpoints. Reach is again a regulatory authority that who looks at all these things. So QSR model relevant to regulatory purposes. That's what they are looking at. So regulatory purposes might be mostly pharmacokinetic property. They would be saying for this kinds of administration, these are the requirements. And then also we want to look scientifically validate the QSR model. Basically, we look at try to satisfy OECD principles and documented QMRF. So OECD principles also, again, I'm not repeating it. Of course, you all are aware of it. And then when you're coming to the QSAR, of course, there is something called as reports. So there are certain formats for certain methodologies. So for QSAR, it is a documentation is called QMRF, which I will show you in a moment. The other third criteria is QSAR model applicable to query molecule. That is called applicability domain or the scope of the model, which is relevant for the substance of interest. And this is very, very, very important. When you're bringing in a structure or a compound, let's name it as compound A, and if the chemotype or the scaffold or if the structure itself is not similar to any of the chemical compound they used in the model or to generate the model, if it is not present, then you cannot say that the prediction from those models are reliable. So your compound chemotype, I mean the structure similarity, should fit in within the molecules that is chosen to generate those models. So in order to generate those models, we have to use experimental data where we have wet lab studies or assay studies. Those data we have used to generate these statistical or machine learning models. So keep in mind your molecule, whichever you're planning to synthesize or virtually designed, you are trying to predict its data using activity data or toxicity data using QSAR models. Ensure that that QSAR model also uses similar structures. If the similarity of those structures are not present in the QSAR model, then the structure predictions are not viable. So combination of all this tells you the reliable QSAR results and results documentation, which is called QMRF. I don't know how many of you are aware of this QMRF. When you try to do projects with European Union companies or other research organizations, including some of the US counterparts, they do ask your report of QSAR in QMRF format. That is something approved format actually. I've seen some papers when they publish, they also generate this QMRF format. Okay, so this is what I was telling you about accessing the predictive ability. So earlier, what I explained about applicability domain, let me explain it a bit more in a deeper. We have to understand the model chemical space. And here applicability domain, that is AD, is characterized using descriptors, structural features, metabolic transformations, and mechanistic information. The diversity of the training set also defines the chemical space of the molecule. And the position of a new compound related to the chemical space is reflected in the reported confidence in the prediction. Let me explain it by using this particular graph or the plot. Wherever you see this green dots or the particular data points. They are called the structures that had experimental assays which were being used for QSAR modeling. Now, there is an oval surrounding through that data points that tells you the applicability domain, the domain of applicability, right? That is the range where we can have the coverage of the training set. Now, let's imagine you're bringing in a compound to predict the activity using this model. If your compound, imagine that LO star is your compound. If your compound is fitting within the training set's chemical space, that means structure similarity, molecular descriptor similarity. If it is going to fit within that, then the standard deviation will be lesser and the prediction will be more accurate. I don't say this is a step for to replace the wet lab experiments, never, but at least the data predicted will be reliable. And if your compound is very close to that particular domain of applicability, not too much similar, but so very close, still the predictions are having less standard deviation. So it's still reliable kind of okay data. But imagine if your compound is actually not at all similar or not at all close to the chemical space of the training set that you used, and it is staying away, the prediction is completely away from whatever the training set is done, the predictions are unreliable. Means do not take that result as a decision making step. What this trying to tell you is that it doesn't tell you that model is bad or software is bad. It is trying to tell you that the chemotype or the chemical structure that you brought in is not present in the training set. So in order to use these QSAR models for predictions, ensure that you're also aware of what are the different types of chemistries, chemical structures, or the chemical space of the training set that is used for a better reliability. And the scientific validity of a QSAR model is that a defined endpoint is very important. An unambiguous algorithm, a defined applicability domain. I don't know how many of you have published papers in QSAR. Keep in mind, you have to report applicability domain. Until unless you report applicability domain, the QSAR cannot be validated by itself. Appropriate measures of goodness of fit, robustness, and predictivity. There are many statistical performance parameter criteria. RMSE, Q square, right? Then R square, then cross validation, that is R square CV, then P value, then student T test, and many more like that. So these all statistical parameters can help you to understand the performance of the model. And when you come to machine learning, of course, if it is a categorical data, you can always look at confusion metrics to understand the false positives, false negatives, and others, including accuracy and MAE values, right? So there are a lot of appropriate measures or metrics that is permitted to look at the goodness of fit, robustness, and predictivity. It's not just R square. And then a mechanistic interpretation. I'll give you an example here. During my PhD days, I was working on mosquito repellency. So we were asked to work on a compound which is better than DEET and permethrin and having lesser toxicities. So we used QSAR methodology. After all those MED assays and all those minimum effective dosage assays and all, we came to certain models. So when the model came, we found that we got around 86 or 87, I think, R square, and we got some descriptors. Even though the R square was looking better, and also the error also was very minimal, but the descriptors did not seem to be having a good physical meaning or a physical significance to the activity. The activity here is repellency. So that's where I wanted to emphasize causation versus correlation. In statistics and machine learning, you can correlate a data with another data. There might not be any relationship in real life with that data, but it might correlate very well. So it is, don't think that whatever you give to statistics and machine learning and whatever you get the data from them, it is always right. You also have to have a sound science of relevance to understand what is the significance of this model, what is the significance of the descriptor values or the molecular properties which could be correlated to this particular property. So ultimately, we came up with a model at the end which was having an R square of 82, not 86 or 88. The main reason was we were able to try to do some calculations like DFT calculations to understand vibrational frequency in order to correlate with repellency parameters. So that is where we also have to look at the mechanistic driven physical meaning, physical significance of the structure with respect to the particular activity. Now, this is what how the QMRF format looks like. There is a free software available on the web for generating QMRF data. You need to just give the data, it will generate the PDF as it looks like on the right hand side of the PPT. So QMRF is means QSAR model reporting format. And there is something called QPRF, which is QSAR prediction reporting format. Both are for different purpose. The first one is for the model where you used your experimental data to generate the model using the training set. The second one, which is QSA prediction report formatting, which is basically for the prediction side, where the model was generated and you're using those data to predict certain activity or values using those models. So this is how the QMRF and QPRF documentation looks like. And there are also QSAR model resources available. These are the different model resources, including QSAR DB. QSAR DB is from the group where I did my Marie Curie Fellowship. Also the research at Estonia with Professor Carolson. So still it is active. So there they try to test all the models that where we have published or anybody has published, and then they try to reproduce it, and then they check the reproducibility of these models, and then come and they publish it those models in that repository, and that is called QSAR DB. And then we have US Environmental Protection Agency chemistry dashboard, and then we have ToxCast, Tox21, Kaggle, StarDrop, and other tools where it can do some more QSAR modeling and resources. Now, when coming to regulatory, it is already said that animal testing is prohibited for cosmetics. And in European Union, use of alternatives to animal testing is much promoted. Even in India, also they have started it. So I don't know among the participants, is there any institution is having the alternative to animal testing centers by UGC? Then chemical safety assessments, and also the REACH, where you have registration, evaluation, authorization, and restriction of chemicals. Then you have the PETA, which is a People of the Ethical Treatment of Animals. And then we have LCSA, which is the Lautenberg Chemical Safety Act. And then we have IATA, which is Integrated Approaches to Testing and Assessment, and TOX21, which shows AOPs, which is like Adverse Outcome Pathways. And that's where we have to look at the evolution of the modern science, where in the 19th century, Elizabeth Blackwell was the first women to formally study and practice medicine in the US. Also, eminent French scientist Louis Pasteur in 1857 said that the Schwann fermentation experiments were supported on the hypothesis that yeast were microorganisms. So that's where we have to see with the evolution of the CAD, why all these things are required. Why do we need to kickstart with all this toxicity or different models? Why do we need to predict them? Well, why can't we simply do synthesis and then test them? Of course, time and money. So let's imagine you are trying to do a synthesis of 5 or 10 compounds, and you want to specifically target one specific protein target. And after doing the testing in manual, practically when you after doing testing, you found that they are not active. How much time, how much money that was being wasted on it, right? So computational drug designing approaches could help you to minimize the cost as well as to minimize the time. if you do it in the right way. That's where we also wanted to understand, why do we need to acquire or obtain the knowledge computationally? Because different viewpoints will be there. Limited experience, because humans, we might not be having too much of wide experience on all different areas. Of course, we do have limited memory. If I read a paper maybe 10 months back, today I won't be able to recollect everything from that paper. Maybe very few information, but not many. And computers have virtually unlimited capacity and perfect recall. Of course, when you do indexing, computers also will be able to search you in a better way than humans does. But of course, we are training them. So they are virtually with unlimited capacity, means they can store as many informations they can. And that is where we are also being able to search large databases of informal information or knowledge in useful, but again limited. This is where we have to understand what is the difference between information and knowledge. So information is like a paint, and knowledge is when the paint is being applied on the wall. That's a simple example, right? So let's look into it a bit more. Computers can apply stored knowledge and much faster than a person, and even scientists have hidden biases. We choose which knowledge to believe, right? We always are biased whether to believe A or B. B is also good, A is also good. Which one to take? All these bias situations will be there. And computers can also explore ideas more quickly and rigorously than a person. Now let us look at through some of the drug discovery phases also. The initial drug discovery phases, we mostly look at the target identification. I know this is not your job to do, but very important part is that until unless your target is well defined and identified, including the validation, whatever docking you do, whatever drug designing based on structure-based drug design, it will not be meaningful. So keep in mind, so even though you might be not looking at the biological target, it is very, very trivial and important to identify and validate the right protein target before doing any kind of drug discovery work, if it is structure based. And later you have drug lead discovery and lead optimization, where you can perform molecular docking, binding affinity studies, pharmacophore screening, and molecular dynamics, and many more. And then we go into the drug development, where we look at the preclinical test, mostly ADME, PKPD, toxicity studies, and all those things comes into the picture. And then we do go for clinical trial. Luckily, all these areas could be assisted with computer-aided drug design. I don't say could be replaced with, and I never said that. And also move out from that assumption that it can be avoided. No, none of the wet lab experiments can be avoided. Only computational tools are going to help you to make decisions. That's all, right? So here, let us see what is the success stories of CAD in pharma. Around 112 molecules that is already being reported, that these are all based upon CAD related analysis. Now, don't think that these compounds came out with only one package. No, and never can be done. It is being using multiple packages so that they were able to come out with a single compound. And don't imagine with a single compound you can do all these analysis, right? So I have taken this list from these two reviews, which is one is in published in 2016 and the other one is 2010. And there's another link which tells you about the fragment-based drug designing. So fragment-based drug designing is also something that is very important, where we can explore more kind of data explorability when you don't find any compounds in all databases, which is well curated nowadays. So now we have to look at a better situation where the chemist will understand what is the requirement from a modeler, and the modeler will be able to understand what chemist synthesize or not. And this is very important to understand, to look at explore the things like how it can be synthesized or what region can be modified. But most of the modeler will look at, okay, I'm looking at a specific property. How can I design a new molecule based upon the property? Now that's where the communication challenges comes between the chemist and the modeler. The modeler says this is the best compound I got based on docking and other studies, and the chemist will say there is a synthetic feasibility issues. We will not able to synthesize as you think because it's expensive and takes more steps. So that's just the place where we have to look at the objectives of CAD. When you wanted to call a molecule to be a drug molecule, it has passed on through heat, lead like, drug-like. These are the different candidates or the stages of a same single compound. So here we have to add. Hello. Do you have any questions?
Participants, do you have any questions? Any queries you can ask sir directly?
Yeah, rather than putting at the end everything, if you have something, you can always start, not a problem at all. So far I have covered a small portion of genotoxicity, the SAR models that can be used for non-testing based approaches. And now I'm telling you about what are the other parameters or other properties that is required for a drug like or a drug molecule in order to be considered that as a promising molecule before going for clinical trials. Okay, no, I don't see any questions. Let me proceed. So I was trying to tell you that when you have a compound selected for potency studies or binding affinity studies, you will be identifying a hit molecule. Or when you do a molecular docking studies, including virtual screening, you're again finding hit molecule. Now, how many of you think that after doing docking, I can select just one or two molecules, or after doing bioassay studies or in vitro studies based on the biological activity studies, I will choose one or two molecules and that will be my drug molecule. How many of you think so? If you want, you can unmute, otherwise you can put it on the chat. This is just to ensure, like we ensure with the students whether they are attentive or not, right? Yeah. So my question was, using animal testing, IC50 values or biological activity analysis, based on that, are you okay with choosing one or two molecules in order to call them as a hit molecule? And someone said yes. So you are screening in silico to identify the molecule based on Ki value. Absolutely fine. How many molecules did you select? That is my question. I mean, not for screening, but after docking, how many compounds did you select for your wet lab studies? One compound, two compound? That was the question.
No, Swati, total how many compounds you are chosen?
Okay.
How many compounds, not activity?
No, I mean, for each activity, I have chosen two compounds. That was
Okay.
my main.
So yeah, I understood
That
that.
based upon
You
highest
mentioned two.
Ka value, sir.
Okay.
I screened approximately 20 to 30 molecules in silico, sir.
Can you tell me the values? Do you remember the Ki values of those two molecules?
Sir, I got of about 9.6, sir.
One is 9.6, the other one?
Other one around 8, sir.
8. And if you can remember the third one also, which you didn't select, the third one, can you tell me the value if possible?
I mean, rest I got around the range of 6 to 7, sir. 6.5, 6.6.
Okay, 6 to 7, 6.7. Okay,
And
thank you, thank you. So just wanted to do an exercise here lively and then to make some case study here, but then I'll continue with the presentation. Now, Madam told me that she chose based upon the activity 2 compounds and based upon the Ki value. She picked up one with 8.6, another with maybe 7.2, and other compounds she didn't select, even though they had maybe 7 or within the range between 6 to 7. Now, my simple question: you did docking, you used a software. Now, the question here is, how far do you rely on the prediction of those values? Because 7.6, or sorry, 8.6 and 7, not a huge difference. How do you justify yourself this is accurate? I don't want you to answer. I want to just think. Question number one. Second question: do you think you have chosen only the first two compounds? Do you think the third compound is really a bad compound to avoid it? Or do you think that that could be also considered because that is also within the range of 6 to 7? Because I already considered a compound which is having 7.2 or 7.4. Did I did a mistake? Did I simply avoid a compound which could be also a candidate? Something like when we are selecting students for sports, like, did I miss it? So these are called avoid opportunities being missed actually. And the third question: how do you think that these values, whatever Ki values, is going to correlate with your in silico with the concentration on IC50, nanomolar or microgram per milliliter? How you're going to correlate them? They are not directly correlated anyway. You cannot put a scatter plot and correlate them. Not possible. So these are the questions that you have to ask yourself. Okay, so another thing, I don't mean that the others are inactive, but after docking with better Ki, there are chances for maximum pharmacological effect. That's exactly the point I'm trying to tell you. So we expect that choosing the best Ki values, the first two, will be having a better chance of having better activity. That is what I'm again repeating. We just found a hit molecule. By doing docking, we are just making the compound reach the target at a micro level and making it to dock and to understand it. But before the molecule reaches the target, there are many things the molecule has to face: pharmacokinetics, pharmacodynamics, whether the molecule will be stable until it reaches the target. Are we analyzing through while doing the docking? No, not at all. Now, when you chosen those two molecules based on your Ki value, how sure you are that the compound will be stable, metabolically stable? The compound is non-toxic. The compound is permeable. The compound is soluble. All those things we have to anyway analyze. I don't say no to it. But my concern here is, why only two? So that is what we have to understand. Just simply doing docking, don't make any decisions. Docking is more of a geometrical analysis, but you have to make it converted to mechanistic driven by applying the catalytic site information and functional site information. That's where you have to go deeper into it. That's what I started with the session saying, that we always say we are not meant to do that advanced level, but when we will go then? It's too late actually to go into that level, right? So thank you so much for those data, because these are some data which help us to think. I never said this is wrong. Of course, that is right. But we have to start thinking of these questions, and we have to answer. We will be having 100 answers for that, but we have to come to a final conclusion. So hit molecules just tells you whether they are permanent or whether they could tightly bind to the target. That's all a hit molecule can say. Next, lead molecule. Whenever the pharmacokinetic and also pharmacodynamic properties are viable, then those molecules which are already hit molecule can be called as a lead molecule. When they also do not show much of toxicity and a balance and metabolically stable and many more others, we could say it could be a drug candidate or a drug-like molecule. Only when it passes through clinical trial we can say it's a drug molecule candidate. So it is very true that we have to identify chemical structures with an optimal balance of these properties. It doesn't mean that your compound should be non-toxic, not never possible, right? So it is always trying to see the balance. So we have to have a compound to be a good potency should be there. Your drug should be safe. Absorption rate in your human intestinal absorption rate should be good. Metabolic stability when it passes through several metabolic pathways. The first one is liver metabolism through cytochrome P450. We have to make sure that it doesn't break down. Then solubility, flexibility, permeability, all those things has to be taken care. So we have to quickly identify the situation when this balance is not possible. And this is one of the reasons how to reduce the cost of failures. So last year, I think in 2019, Sanofi almost lost 1.5 billion US dollars because one of their drug got rejected by FDA. Does it mean that they are going to stop the research? No, they will be still continuing, right? But for the extra research, they have to spend money. And that where they will get the money, they have to put it on us, right? So ultimately the cost of the medicine will increase. So we have a great contribution there, how we can make early decisions. If you make early decision and if you identify these kinds of chemotypes or compound does not work, that is going to fail fast and fail cheap. And only when confident you're going to move forward with the data. And you have to try to avoid missed opportunity. The same question I asked earlier, how confident we are saying that the third compound might not be a good compound when compared to the first and the second. We didn't try, right? Another major reason why we didn't try, because funding issues. We have only funds to test only 1 or 2 molecules, not 3 molecules or 4 molecules. There are other main constraints, not that we do not know, we know, but we have other constraints where it is stopping us to do all these things. So that's where we have to look at different scoring levels and chemical spaces to understand the confidence of the prediction, chance of success, like prioritizing compounds with chance of success. As Madam also rightly said, we are looking at the chance of activity. It could be also having better chance because of the better Ki value. Absolutely right. But we also have to understand how this optimization can be guided. I'll tell you the reason why. And this is another one, a feature which helps you to design new molecules also. Optimization, we always say, but how or what information that we have to optimize, sometimes it is limited. Let's imagine that you have a compound A and B. A is very active and B is very inactive. And when you went for toxicity studies, you found A is very toxic and B is very, very less toxic. Ultimately, we will go with A only. But the problem here is we have to still optimize. B, by taking B, no use because there's no activity, even though it is less toxic. So as a chemist, he or she will think about optimizing where or which region of the compound is reasonable reason for the toxicity. So they have to restrain the region where it is showing better activity, but the toxicity has to be also reduced. So these are the algorithms which tells you that a glowing molecule, which region of the molecule tend to be having more contribution to toxicity and which one is less. So a chemist will try to get an understanding, okay, where we have to do optimization. Is there any, just a minute. Okay, I thought there was a chat or something. Okay. Okay. So this particular region, that like this red region this region is trying to tell you there is a positive contribution to the toxicity, and the blue region is trying to tell you that it is having less contribution to the toxicity. So here you can always think about replacing this region or doing some optimization. Now comes the next question, which is always a challenging question. I already told you, just with docking, we cannot say this is a drug candidate. We can only say it is a hit molecule. But in order to call it as a lead molecule, we need to check its absorption, distribution, metabolism, toxicity, and many more parameters. So let me give you an example, and then I'm following a question. So imagine we have 10 different compounds. We have to carry out 10 different experiments. Each experiments are very important to, it could be like some are more important, some are less important, we don't know, but they are all required to make a decision among the 10, how many compounds are drug-like or could be a promising drug candidate. So the question comes here is how to choose best 3 molecules among the 10 molecules, considering all the 10 different experiment data. Usually what we do first experiment, we select the best ones. With that, we do the second one, choose the best one. The best ones will go for the next experiment. That's how we do. Excuse me. But here, what I'm trying to say is all the answer. It can be anything, so don't worry. We are just looking at different perspectives to understand. If you want me to repeat a question, I'll repeat again. So you have 10 different compounds. All the 10 compounds will be going through 10 different experiments. Now the question is, how do we choose the best 3 molecules considering all the 10 experiments results, not just one? Any idea? I think we are almost 33 members. Nobody is telling. If you didn't understand, please let me know. I can try to give some other example.
Sir, you mean to say experimental results in the sense different activities, sir?
No, not activity. One could be activity. The other could be absorption rate studies. The other could be metabolic stability studies.
Yes, yes.
So because all these properties tells you that whether your compound is a lead molecule or not.
Yes, yes. So different parameters
And all these
we are studying. Yeah.
Exactly. All these parameters are required anyway.
So there should be a comprehensive tool to predict that among those compounds, 2 or 3 are more effective.
That is very true.
Yes.
That is very true. But as of now, with you, how will you take this forward?
Okay, sir. No idea. You please.
No. Why I am asking you this is, we have done it in a different way so far, which I'm going to explain. I will tell you to. As what you rightly said, it's a comprehensive approach is required anyway. That is very true.
Yes,
So
sir.
let me go forward with that. So we get a lot of data from in silico, in vitro, and in vivo data for the same set of compounds, right? Now, how do we correlate all these data or combine all these data to make to a decision? In order to make decisions, we need.
Sorry to interrupt, sir.
No
Actually,
problem.
in a QSAR study, like how we teach them theoretically the students, like we go for an Hans analysis study where we take into consideration the hydrophobicity substituent constant. At the same time, both steering parameters all put together can give a good idea about the molecule, sir, to predict the activity.
Yes.
In that way, sir.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, that is also true, but that is related to that only activity.
Yes.
And that could be very selective to that activity.
Yes, sir. Yes,
but
yes.
Those properties might not be selective to their property or activity. That's what I'm trying to say. So here we have data from different in silico, in vitro, in vivo studies for the same set of molecules. Now we wanted to understand which of these properties is required to make decisions. Decision means which are the compounds that I'm going for the next step. There are
Yes.
two criteria. One is importance. You wanted to prioritize which property and secondly, certainty. Certainty is something very important. I don't know how we are giving importance to this research. Because we're in our school or school, we were doing iterations. During iterations, we did the replicates and we calculated the mean and the standard deviation. But when it came to animal studies, maybe doing it, I don't know, sorry, because I have not seen reported in the paper. And in vitro studies, there might be no replicates. If there are no replicates, how can you justify your animal studies or in vitro studies are reliable or accurate? Because if I don't see a standard error or a standard deviation, statistically, I'm not able to believe this data does not have experimental variability. So finally, you have to make selection based on quality and diversity. And this is not simply click on a button. You have to do it manually, considering diversity. This is where the point I have to mention earlier when Madam said she selected two based upon the KI value. I would
Yes.
come across now, not only KI values, you have to consider some diversity, a bit of a diverse chemotype so that you have more chance of success. Of course, you need money to test more molecules. That is there. So technically, most of the time, how do we combine all the data or the experimental data to make selections? Usually you start with some set of molecules, you do potency studies, all the inactive molecules will be removed, and then you select some set of molecules, go for the next level of absorption rate studies. Again, you remove some inactive molecules or non-absorbed molecule, then go for toxicity. Toxic molecules will be removed. Ultimately, you expect that you're getting a very good molecule. Unfortunately, most of the time, not always, most of the time, this compound will not be here reaching. It might be hiding here. Means your compound will be highly potent, but it is lacking absorption rate. It might not get absorbed in the human. That in that case, you might, after particular filtering approach, you might end up with a non-missing. And in which case, after many presentations to many institutions and researchers, most of them agreed with me. Most of the time, this is what they also faced. Even after doing docking, all those analysis, at the end of the day, they might get a moderately active, not the best active molecule. And this is because we are not considering all the properties together. Rather, we are considering one by one. This is where I want to tell the answer for the question, how 10 molecules will be ranked or the best 3 could be taken from the 10 different experiments that you carry out. So you have to be very cautious in this kind of methodology, which we are doing. Even I was also doing this, but after realizing and reading many papers where this approaches have its own issues, we started understanding it. Now let me give you a very best example, Lipinski rule of 5. They said the molecular weight should be less than 500. I don't know among the participants how many of you read Lipinski rule of 5, but I'm sure many of you have used it. It is clearly said Lipinski rule of 5 is used for oral bioavailability, but we put a standard procedure saying that take a database, first filter with Lipinski rule of 5. Sometimes for our studies, it might not be required also. So that's where you are missing the opportunities by using unnecessary rules and RO5 or some other approaches. Anyway, what I'm trying to tell you here is again the next question here. We have a molecular weight written as less than 500. Do you think a compound with molecular weight of 501 is a bad molecule? Or it is going to be an inactive molecule? I don't think so.
Yes, definitely, sir.
So when you strictly apply certain rules, the rule just follows what you said. Less than 500, it will never take 501 molecular weight. But on a practical point of view, we can think that could also work because there are compounds, FDA approved drugs, which is in 800 molecular weight also. That's where we have to give the importance level. What we are trying to do here is, as you rightly said, some competitive comparative tool has to become up. That is called rule inferences. So we use a fuzzy logic to understand the importance. What we try to do here is anything less than 500 molecular weight, we say we will give a score of 1. So maximum is 0, minimum is 0, and the maximum score is 1. So we say anything, any compound less than 500 molecular, we will, for example, if we take molecular, we can take any property. It could be experimental and it could be predicted. It could be any property that you're combining to make decisions. So here you are saying that molecular weight should be less than 400 in the example here. Yeah, it is written here between 100 and 450. So what we are trying to do here is any compound within 100 and 450 will be given a score value of 1. Anything above 450 will come with a score of 0.8 or 0.6. And anything less than 100 might be coming up with a 0.4 or 0.2 score. That means we are not simply avoiding any compounds other than 100 and 450 range. We are also considering them, but giving it a very less importance. By doing that, we are not simply removing them from our data set, we are still considering them for optimization. Only at the end, we might be removing it. This is only because it is not just molecular weight is only responsible for the drug activity. It is many other properties are also involved. As I rightly said in my question, all 10 different experiments are important to make a decision whether your compound could be a drug-like or a lead molecule. So all 10 is required. So ultimately, we have to decide which one is more prioritized and less prioritized. So here, if you see log P less than 4 or equal to 4, ligand efficiency greater than 0.3, molecular weight between 100 and 450, and the PPP, plasma protein binding category, that also like of low. These are the requirements. That requirements, if you give anything within that compound category, the compounds will come. But anything, for example, ligand efficiency 0.3, but I got a compound with 0.29, it will not come.
Sir? Girnath sir? Hello? Hello?
So can you hear me?
Sir, now
Yes,
we can
yes,
hear you, sir.
yes.
Now we can
We
hear
can hear you, sir. Yeah.
Thank you. Being I'm at home, power issues, internet, all this are coming up. Sorry about that.
No problem.
So this is where we are trying to give the level of importance. So the importance tells you how much score to be contributed for these values. So this is a rule-based inferences. Now this is already applied in 2010. I have given the citation at the bottom of the slide. They have already used this for Pfizer candidates in CNS drugs. And I'm talking about this in 2021, which is like 11 years before. They have already tried. Now, when we are going to try it? That is a question here. So let it be advanced. Let it be is when you're doing a step-by-step prioritization filtering, miss some molecules. So when they did, they found only 60%. But they applied this approach of multi-parameter optimization. That is a approach name, the technique's name. And that they found extra 40%, which is like 74%. So this multi-parameter optimization, I have seen this terminology in MPharm pharmacology CAT paper as per the people.
Sir? Girnath sir?
Yes, sir.
There is some a little bit disturbance is there. So, okay, sir. Now okay.
Okay, fine.
Right.
So we also look at the bioavailability on absorption, liver metabolism, permeability, lipophilicity, and hydrogen bonding. All this has to be correlated. And ultimately, at whether will it get in, whether will it get in the small intestine, and then distribute, where will it get distributed after getting absorbed, and whether metabolism, liver metabolism, and others, and will it stay in or get it excreted properly. And most of the properties like volume of distribution, clearance, absorption, half-life, oral bioavailability could be predicted from a chemical structure, but not the dosage amount and dosage frequency. So now if you ask me, how can we extract all these pharmacokinetic properties from a chemical structure? As I said earlier, like in QSAR, you're extracting molecular properties called as molecular descriptors or physiochemical properties. We try to correlate these physiochemical properties of a chemical compound with the pharmacokinetic property called ADME properties. And there are plenty of experimental studies being done since 1980s, 2015 kind of, and those data is being used in many of the softwares for predicting the ADME properties. And that's how it is being come up. Now, these are the different properties that is available in StarDrop, where you have aqueous solubility, partition coefficient, then 2C9, PKI, hERG liability, blood-brain barrier, option, plasma glycoprotein, form of P450, then plasma protein, molecular weight, and certain thermodynamic properties like flash point, surface tension, thermal conductivity, including pKa values. And also the predictive toxicology also being there. Again, based upon experimental data, we were able to generate all these different papers. When it gets combined to generate the model, the accuracy of the model will be different. This is the reason why when you try to predict ADME using multiple same compound, you get different values. Now, in order to believe which one is the right, I cannot say StarDrop is the best in the world. I cannot say Swiss ADME is best in the world. If someone is saying that, I won't believe it. The reason is, the first thing you have to understand, the compound that I am doing it for predicting, I have to make sure that particular chemotype or the scaffold or the structure having similar structure where they have used it in their training set. So until unless I know the training set, I cannot rely on these predictions by any tool. So that is where we have to evaluate and understand which one to be reported. So it is not simply like I use this ADME that is easy and best to use. It works for my project, not necessarily for your compounds. Your compounds might be different from my compounds that I have used. So you have to understand the training set. And finally, the diagnosis which tries to predict human toxicity. This again, it talking bacterial mutagen, that epoxide is a region is well known for bacterial mutagen. And here also they try to predict no values, but more of argumental, whether it's saying certain, probable, plausible, or equivocal. And he tells you that which region of your molecules toxicity endpoints. Total toxicity endpoints that is being there in StarDrop, around 43 toxicity endpoints are available in StarDrop. And these are all from clinical data, human data. None of them are animal toxicity. Apart from the developmental toxicity models, all these are human toxicity models. Of course, a play of them. Organ nephrotoxicity, and many more. And these are all knowledge based. So it's not QSAR based. Knowledge based means based on the clinical study, they understood that these presence of this particular region of the compound or these certain fragments, they are named to be toxins. There are plenty of publications happened where they report these fragments are toxins. So when they design new molecule, they always keep a cheat sheet in front of them to know these are the toxins, so don't add them when you're designing the molecules. And of course, software will take care of that. And there are lead optimization techniques also when you wanted to make some changes in your molecules. You wanted to see how far the differences can be made based on fragment-based drug designing or combinatorial-based drug designing also. So here we can identify certain targets, which fragments, which could be viable. And this is the compound called imatinib, which is Gleevec. And we have also combination of 2D and 3D SAR analysis and R group analysis, especially for chemists when they wanted to see activity neighborhood and matched pair series and bioisosteric replacements, pro-drug strategy if you wanted to make your compound active and do not get degraded. And also when you do transformations from lactame to pyrimidine, you also or JMCAM or others, tetrahedral letters from how this transformation is being carried out with its bioactivity. And here also the glowing molecule algorithm will be able to predict properties based upon the prediction. So here, if you see value here 6.7, the hERG actually, and fexofenadine, where the single methyl group is transformed to carboxylic acid, you can see the hERG has turned to be 5.2. So when you look at the experimental, also fexofenadine has having a lower hERG liability than tefenadine. And then you also have, we have also incorporated something similar. You can predict this retrosynthesis. So when you design a new molecule, the first and foremost question by a modeler, can this be synthesized? I know where to get this data. If you don't have access to SciFinder, this is the best one, which comes free of cost for the academics from StarDrop, where you can give the structure and it will try to find out based upon the reactive database and give you the literature references with the yield and similarity of your target structure. And when you look at the case study, this is what I want to emphasize here, and this is my second last slide. That's all I'm done. So let's consider that you have chosen 3,100 compounds for virtual, for docking studies or anything. And keep in mind, when you're doing virtual, thousands of molecules. And then if you do docking score to rank them, that makes sense. With the 10 or 5 molecules, just using docking score does not have any sense, because docking score does not talk about protein. It talks only about the ligand. Binding energy talks about, or binding affinity talks about both protein and the ligand. So it's very important for lesser number of molecules, you mostly look at Ki values as well as binding affinity, or even for use. But keep also in your mind, when you use Autodock, you do not get docking score, rather you get a free binding energy. Free binding energy in kcal per mole. And then you have something called as inhibition constant, and they give you a value. Please kindly do not report that value. And they are not at all being very much simulated to understand whether that is accurate or not. Nowhere it will be close enough. I don't deny it. Most of the time it's not. So be careful when you're reporting the inhibition.